Hey guys, it's Sebastian from AskSebby, and today we are going to look at some cards that you might want to consider if you are someone who has high spends. Before we dive into it though, a big favor is to give this a thumbs up, and if you are someone who wants to make sure that you get these videos, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. So the first thing we're going to talk about is what I mean by high spend. So this is likely going to be a question in the comments, and what I mean by this is if you spend more than $10,000 in a calendar year in non-category expenses. So right off the bat, that doesn't really sound like that much because $10,000 divided by 12 months, that's less than $1,000 per month. And it is going to be on the low end for some people, but we'll also talk about some more expensive cards that might make sense as well. The most important bit here though is that we're talking about non-category spends. The reason is because if you do have category spend, then it's pretty straightforward. You pick the card that has a multiplier for that category. If you're someone who spends a lot eating out, if you're someone who has to take clients out every night, then the gold card from American Express or the Chase Sapphire Reserve or maybe the Saver card probably makes sense given your categories. The reason we're talking about non-category spend is because there's going to be a bunch of people who watch this channel who are eventually going to run out of intro bonuses to go after, or who just have so much spend, but they still want to maximize it. Easy examples of this are if you're someone in school and you've been doing this for a while, you have tuition payments which tend to be very expensive and you're making those anyways, and you're either paying a set fee or you're paying nothing at all in order to pay tuition. If you're someone who has a bunch of investments and you're paying taxes this year for it, then that's another very good use case. Property tax is also another one if you own a home. If you're someone who's reselling stuff online, if you're someone who is doing a drop shipping service, then that also isn't abnormal to have to purchase items in order to make money back. With all of that out of the way, we are going to focus on a bunch of different cards that have options all the way down from $10,000 in a calendar year, so about $1,000 a month in non-category spend, all the way up to a lot of money. Let's say $250,000 because that seems like a pretty large amount. Like with most videos, we're going to look at this analytically, so we'll start off with Chase. And here we have a bunch of cards that I'm actually going to quickly talk about, but we're not really going to focus on because I don't really think it makes sense. You'll probably notice this in the rest of my video that I'm going to focus on the ones that I feel like add value. The first one of which is going to be the IHG Traveler card, where you can spend a bunch of money in order to get platinum status. The reason this isn't really that valuable is because you can effectively buy platinum status by getting the IHG Premier card, and given that the annual fee isn't too unreasonable, I think it makes a bit more sense. Same thing with the Chase Marriott's Boundless card. Yes, you can spend in order to get gold status. I believe it's $35,000, but it's not really worth it because there's other cards out there that can get you that status at a cheaper rates. One really interesting one, which requires a lot of spend, is going to be if you get a Southwest card and you want to get Southwest Companion Pass. If you have a lot of non-category spend, if you're buying inventory for your grocery store, convenience store, and you don't have other relationships where it's cheaper if you do cash, if you put $120,000, you're going to get Companion Pass for the current year and the year afterwards. With a lot of this stuff, you do need to make sure that you are actually getting value and you're not doing something for the sake of it. So I know some people who go after status because they want status, but in reality, they don't really travel enough to benefit from it. You really want to avoid that because that doesn't really make sense. Always remember to factor in your opportunity cost. So where else could you have spent this money, and what points or what other currencies or cashback could you have otherwise gotten? If you are someone who still has the Chase Ritz-Carlton card, then I think spending $75,000 to get Marriott Platinum status is something worth considering, just because you do get a lot of value of Platinum compared to Gold. If you don't have this card, you can still do the same thing over on American Express, and we'll talk about that a bit more towards the middle of the video. And if anything, the American Express side makes a bit more sense, and we'll discuss it then. The final card that I think is definitely worth considering is going to be the Hyatt card, and this has a lot of play whether you're someone who is looking at $15,000 of non-category spend or someone looking at substantially more, $140,000. The reason for that $15,000 number is because if you spend that amount, you end up getting a free night, but you have to do the spend and you have to have that card, but that's the marketing. You get a free night that's worth between a category 1 and a category 4. If you put that $15,000 into a 2% card, you're getting $300 in value, which is pretty good. But if you put it onto the Hyatt card, you're going to get 15,000 Hyatt points as well as that certificate nights. 15,000 points, given how I like to use my points, is already going to be $300 in value at 2 cents per point, so that pretty much matches it off, and then you get that 1 to 4 night on top. If you are someone who has very high non-category spend, then it might make sense to actually put a lot more spend onto this card, just because there's a bunch of different promotions related to the card. So that sounds very vague, but the reason for this is because for every $5,000 of spend that you put on the card, you end up getting 2 nights, and these are going to be 2 nights towards status, not 2 nights that you can use. The more nights you earn, you end up getting a bunch of different promotions. If you spent $140,000, you would get globalist status, given that you would have 5 nights from the card by itself, as well as a bunch of different upgrade certificates, as well as these free nights. The category 1 to 7 one is probably going to be one of the more valuable ones. Side note, if you are someone looking to learn about these cards, whether you're a normal person going after that $15,000 non-category spend one, or if you're someone after globalist status and you want to support our channel, a very easy way to do that would be to use the links that are on our website, AskSebby.com, as well as down below in the description box. As always, thank you guys for the support, and let's dive back into the video. So coming down from that crazy slope of spend that we just talked about over of the Hyatt card, the next one is going to be Barclays, which is a bit interesting. It is still going to be high spend, but I think it's going to be a bit more tangible for a lot of people. The reason we're talking about Barclays next is due to the fact that they have a 624 rule, so Chase has a 524. We're pretty much moving from hard to get to easier to get. If you have the JetBlue Plus card and you spend $50,000 in a calendar year on that card, you're going to get Mosaic status. This is going to be the top level JetBlue status. It sounds pretty good on the surface, but it does not get you upgrades to Mint, which is going to be their business class, which I really like, unless there is going to be an operational upgrade, which is something that I just wouldn't count on. The main value of Mosaic status is going to be those other side perks, so early boarding, better call service if you have to call in, and obviously checked in, check bag, stuff like that. But the other one is going to be EMS, which is going to be even more space upgrades. So pretty much upgrades to the premium economy. If you're someone who's tall, then this is pretty valuable. If you're someone who doesn't really care about the space and you don't mind being cramped, then probably not valuable. I'm not going to do this for all of the cards, but if you had to spend $50,000, if you had a 2% card, that is going to be $1,000 in value. So you want to make sure that the points you're getting back as well as the status is going to be worth more than that opportunity cost. With that same $50,000 in spend, you would earn 50,000 points at 1.5 cents per point. That is going to be $750 in value. This effectively means that you're paying $250 for Mosaic status, assuming that we're looking at the opportunity cost and you're not paying any fees in order to do these payments. Your mileage may vary on whether that's worth it for you. Next is going to be US Bank, which has a Radisson card where you can earn a free night by spending $10,000 on the card. I'm not really as familiar with that program, but it is something out there, and I think if you're someone who likes that brand, then it's definitely worth considering. Quick reminder that with US Bank, don't do anything that can be construed as non-organic spend, just because they are very trigger happy of shutting people down. I can't really think of anything for Citi, Capital One, or Wells Fargo, so we'll skip those for now. There is going to be an argument for the Discover card, the Discover It Miles card, but I think it doesn't really scale in the long term, so it probably doesn't make sense for most people. In the first year, if you have a lot of spend, then you're getting cashback match or miles match, which means that you're getting double what you're getting with that miles card, so 1.5x is really going to be 3x. Side note, if you haven't liked the video yet, give it a thumbs up. So the reason I say American Express is chunky is because they have a lot of offers for people who have very high spend. Starting off with the Hilton cards, we have the Surpass card, where if you spend $15,000, you get an anywhere weekend nights. So pretty similar to the Hyatt one, but you can use this Hilton one at any of their high-end properties, so even something like the Water Astoria Maldives, which tends to be very expensive. For people who really want to maximize their travel, especially if they're going to aspirational places, then hitting these bonuses makes a lot of sense. You can also spend a lot of money in order to get diamond status, but it doesn't really make sense to me. The reason being that the Aspire card is relatively achievable, and it's a card that makes sense in its own right anyways, unless you really can't get another card or you don't want to get it for some reason. Speaking of the Aspire card, you can also spend a lot of money on that card to get an additional night, but I don't really think it's worth it because $60,000 is a lot of money. Your mileage may vary, so do what makes sense for you, but for me, I don't think I would go after that one. One quick honorable mention, because I think someone's going to mention this in the comments, the Blue Business Plus card does give you 2x back MR points on up to $50,000 of spend per calendar year. So if you do have a lot of non-category spend and you really hate airline status or you hate hotels and stuff because you don't think it's valuable, which is very fair, then doing that might make a bit more sense. It is going to be a business card though, so if you're someone who's not eligible for business cards, then that's going to be harder to get, but most people, if you really wanted to, you can get business cards. The rationale being that there's probably something that you do on the side that would qualify as a sole proprietorship. Speaking of business cards, there is going to also be a Hilton Surpass business card, which has a similar night that you get after $15,000 in spends. Worth considering if you have that spend anyways, or if you are someone who wants to get that anywhere nights. Marriott Bonvoy business card is available, but it's not really worth spending to get status to me. If you wanted Marriott status, you're better off getting the Brilliant card and then spending $75,000. You end up getting status for the year that you earned it based off the calendar year, as well as the year afterwards. Like I mentioned with the Ritz card, the main draw of it is going to be if you are someone who goes to places where you can access the lounge with it, as well as potentially free breakfast, and then upgrades, which is your mileage may vary depending on where you like to travel. I find that in Asia, I tend to get upgrades, while in the US, they really don't care. If you are someone in a weird situation where you have both the Ritz card, the old one, as well as the Brilliant card, I think the Brilliant one is a bit easier to get status just because I've had friends who have hit $75,000 in spend over on the Ritz card and they ended up waiting 8 weeks and they didn't hear anything back. They had to contact them. They had to really push it before they ended up getting status. I wouldn't be surprised if the system over there isn't really as well connected since the card is technically grandfathered and they don't really have as many customers doing that type of spend over there compared to over on American Express. Or maybe I'm wrong and it really just does take that long, but from what I've heard, American Express side might make a bit more sense for that. The final bunch of stuff we're going to talk about is going to be on the Delta side. So if you're someone who wants to get Delta status, then this is actually going to be a very interesting way to do it. One reminder is that don't get status for the sake of getting status. If you don't fly, having status doesn't really help you. So even though the Chase United cards have similar benefits to this where you can spend a lot of money in order to help you towards status, it can't get you status by itself. That's kind of why I didn't really include it, because I think unless you're someone who's short of the PQPs is the new term, I think. Unless you're short of the PQPs, you're not really going to care about that. Over on the Delta side though, even if you are someone who doesn't fly a lot, you can technically generate status just by spending a lot of money. So this is going to involve the Delta Platinum cards as well as the Delta Reserve cards, and this is also both the personal side and the business side. For the Delta Platinum cards, you can earn 10,000 miles towards status for every $25,000 in spend that you do. This is called Status Boost. You can do this twice per year. Reminder that this is not going to be miles that you can actively use. This is miles towards status. So if you are someone who is flying a lot next year or later this year, but you're not flying a lot now and you somehow have a lot of spend, then this might make sense. For most people though, you're probably using this to top off. So if you're a bit short of status and you need that extra boost, which is what it's called, then you typically end up using this. Or you do a mileage run at the end of the year to a place like Abu Dhabi. With the Delta Reserve card, there's a similar program, but you can use this 4 times. It's going to be $30,000 in spends, and you're going to get 15,000 MQMs. So theoretically, if you get the Delta Platinum and the Delta Reserve on the personal side, and you hit both of the boosts, or you hit all of the boosts within those 2 cards, then you can get Delta Platinum status. So of status, you have MQMs, which are the miles that you need to fly, as well as MQDs, which are the dollars that you need to spend. But for Delta, if you end up using your Delta Platinum or Delta Reserve card and spend $25,000 in a calendar year, it waives the MQD requirement. I'm losing my voice for silver, gold, and platinum. If you're someone who's a deal seeker, this ends up being a pretty commonly used tactic to waive the requirement for Delta Platinum status, just because you might be flying something like Korean Air or Air France or KLM, and there's going to be cheaper fares that you are going to book to get the miles, and then you end up using this to waive the MQD requirements. If you're someone with a lot of spends and you are trying to get diamond status for some reason, then you can technically get the MQD waived for diamond by spending $250,000 on your Delta Platinum and Delta Reserve cards, and this is going to be cumulative. So theoretically, you can get both the Delta Reserve cards, the personal and the business, spend $120,000 on each of them to get 4 boosts on each of them, and that gets you almost there to waiving the diamond requirements. Whether that's worth it, I'm going to guess is no, because Delta Diamond is nice, but if you don't fly and you need to generate so much miles anyways, I question whether it's going to be worth it for you. I've said this a lot of times in this video, don't generate status for the sake of status because that doesn't make sense. Generate something because you actually get value from it. One final honorable mention before we wrap up the video is if you are someone who's trying to get the Centurion card, I believe you need to spend $250,000 on a personal platinum card and then $1 million on a platinum business card to get that invitation. There are going to be benefits with the Centurion card, but I think the marginal benefit isn't really that substantial compared to the Platinum card. You can get a lot of what you're getting over there with the Platinum card, and then if you want anything on top, you can probably pay for it. Wrapping up the video, if you want to learn about these cards, a very easy way to do that would be using the links on our site, AskSebby.com, or down below in the description box, right down there. Make sure the offers are competitive, but otherwise using those links really does support the channel. My question for you guys is, what are your thoughts on these? Which ones do you think are worth considering? Which ones do you think aren't really worth it? I think you can tell from how I described a bunch of them which ones I don't think are worth it, but I'd love to get your opinion as well. Actually, let's keep this a bit more organized. Which of these three do you think is the most valuable? Let me know down below. If you liked the video, give it a thumbs up. It really helps us out. If you know anyone else who'd benefit from what we just talked about, share this with them. It'll probably help them out. But otherwise, hope you guys liked it. See you guys next time.